2 days ago, in 1885, 200 crates arrived in New York Harbor. Inside were the parts to a 450,000-pound copper colored statue gifted by the people of France. When the Statue of Liberty was dedicated a year later, then President Cleveland said, "We will not forget that liberty has here made her home, nor shall her chosen altar be neglected." Liberty Enlightening the World, as she was known, arrived on the shores of a country that had fought for its freedom from Britain in 1776, but not for all Americans. It wasn't until a mere 20 years before the statue's assemblage on Bedloe's Island that the Emancipation Proclamation had been read on June 19th, 1865, to 250,000 Americans still enslaved in Galveston, Texas. This truly marked the end of the Civil War and the freedom of all Americans held in bondage within the Confederate States. Slavery's end had soaked into the fabric of America and was officially abolished in December with the ratification of the 13th Amendment. American poet Langston Hughes wrote, "I speak in the name of the Black millions. Let all others keep silent a moment. I have this word to bring, this thing to say, this song to sing. Bitter was the day when I bowed my back beneath the slaver's whip. That day is past. Bitter was the day when I saw my children unschooled, my young men without a voice in the world, my women taken as the body toys of a thieving people. That day is past." Here at Corhaven Graveyard, men, women, and children formerly enslaved on an antebellum plantation in Shenandoah County, Virginia, are buried under a swath of pale violets and in crude rows along the land grant boundary line. These human beings knew the bitter days of which Langston Hughes wrote. Since its dedication on April 30th, 2016, 5 years ago, Corhaven Graveyard has celebrated Juneteenth with community workdays and picnics, as well as last year's lament over racial injustice in America. Coracle recognizes the importance of honestly walking with our brothers and sisters in Christ through the suffering and through the celebration. Most of the 24 African Americans buried in this sacred space didn't realize freedom from the reality of enslavement until they died. They were human beings whose worth was valued as chattel and whose names were stripped from their graves. People who worked on the nearby plantations like John, Nan and her child Lydia, Reuben, Doll, Sal, Jenny, Old Nan, Jim, Ann, Mary, Sue, George, Winnie, Old Jack, Toby, Sam, Boatswain, Margaret, Farrell, Coraline, and Serena. They could be bought or sold, whipped for disobedience, pillaged in every sense of the word, with no way to protect even their unborn descendants from the same way of life. Because of the inherent racism that was baked into American laws, affirming the rights of wealthy property owners and denying rights to Indigenous and African Americans, even after freedom held a light on our country's shoreline, generations have passed in blatant unawareness or indifference to the human suffering these Americans have experienced. Indeed, when we consider all the forms of prejudice, violence, and injustice against African Americans throughout our country's history and even in current events, commemorations such as Juneteenth are especially important. For ultimately, Juneteenth marks the end of our country's reliance on the oppression of human beings through slavery for its economic gain. Today, together, and in a cloud of witnesses, we celebrate the now federal holiday Juneteenth Independence Day, remembering with honor those who suffered the realities of slavery, acknowledging their hope and resilience, recognizing the bond that links Americans today to our collective past, celebrating joyfully with the enslaved who heard the ring of freedom on that very first Juneteenth in 1865, and choosing not to neglect that freedom in our land any longer by raising our voices in the continued prayer for peace among all people.